We are finally here. Part 7, final part of the 2D and 3D animated series. So here in this final part, I'm just going to be kind of walking through the effects that I use in After Effects to kind of tie everything together. And then it's just some like last little details that I made in Procreate using some frame by frame animation, as well as some last second like ice cube illustrations from Illustrator and just throwing those into After Effects as well. So yeah, let's get into part 7 where we make everything look so good together. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm just going to go to the hand composition that I have here. Then I'm just going to export this as a MP4, I think. This is what was exported out of Procreate. And I wanted to export it out with a transparent background, but I was having some issues trying to get that file to export the way that I wanted without having a lot of artifacting and stuff like that. So I just did with an MP4. So I added a Luma key, keying out darker, threshold being about 50, and you can kind of see the artifacting and trying to take away some of that black and everything, but it's still kind of there. What I did, I just put a fill on top of that so that it would just take out all of the black. And then I knew I was going to use the multiply blending mode because that's what I used in the initial illustration. And so everything is kind of back to where it needs to be. We're going to start adding in some more texture into the flat parts of the illustration here. So I'm going to go to my oranges comp and I'm just going to go to this first initial orange up top here because that's our most full one. And I'm going to do a really grainy shadow kind of texture here using a shape layer. So if I add a shape layer and I'm going to roughly just do a quick pen tool action around this, this edge here. I actually want it to be the same color as the orange because we're going to multiply this on top of it. Multiply that, and then we're going to use a set matte effect. And we're just going to say, make it stick to the orange here. We're also going to parent this to the orange as well. So when the orange wiggles around, so does that shadow. Then I'm going to use the roughen edges effect. And this bit right here, this is actually used from a tutorial from Ben Marriott, who does a great job of explaining how to make looping textures and in this grain specifically. So be sure to check that out too for a little more in-depth explanation on that. So I'm going to use the roughen edges. I'm actually going to set matte down below here. I'm going to turn the scale down, and then I'm going to kind of mess with this border radius here. So it's very faint, but you can kind of see, if I'm to do another blending mode here, you can kind of see how that affects the kind of the feathering of that. If you affect the scale, it makes it even bigger and chunkier. I'm gonna keep that down to a nice finer grain. Pretty faint, but it's pretty nice, I think. So I'm just gonna apply that same technique to the rest of the some of the leaves and the flower buds here and the rest of the oranges. So I'm also adding these little frame by frame details that I did where it's literally just about like 6 frames or so of just redrawn detail. Nothing's really like moving, but I parented the looping details to the moving orange here that's kind of rotating on a loop. And then just did the loop out cycle, time remapping process. So I'm going to be applying this to the other little oranges as well. Obviously the glass here is the biggest sore thumb out of the entire composition. It's very muddy looking, it doesn't really fit in with the color palette, it just kind of stands out and not in a good way. So we're going to add quite a bit of effects to this glass here to really blend it in with the composition and kind of give it its own bit of character and make it feel a little more 3D as well. So I'm going to go to the glass cutout composition. And this is where it's literally just the one where we have the alpha and then we have the 3D render here. So because this is just happening to the glass, like what we can see here and not the alpha, we're just going to add the effects onto the glass render. So the first one I'm going to add is the color key, which essentially what I want it to do, I want it to kind of take some of these tones that we have that's kind of like muddy looking. It's kind of like an off orange brown. I want it to kind of take away some of that so it can make it look a little more transparent. So I'm going to color pick just this general area here. And then I'm going to bump up the tolerance to maybe about 10 and see how that looks. So it doesn't take away everything, which is fine. We want some foundation still to work with. But you can see it kind of takes away some of the refraction and some of that background bit of glass, which I think is kind of cool. And it kind of sells the idea that it is transparent glass a little bit better. I'm going to feather this a little bit as well, just so it's not so noisy like that. It doesn't really look very good. Just to smooth that out a little bit better. You can already tell, like, it looks pretty good, I think. The next effect we're going to add is a 4-color gradient. And obviously that doesn't look super awesome right off the bat. So I'm going to pull my library here with that color palette. I'm going to pick the color straight from my library that I have here. I'm going to do this like off-white color. I'll do the green tone because I want to get that kind of the refraction of the stem of the background as well. I'll kind of pull these dots a little closer in so we can get those colors going. We want to set the blending mode to something like overlay or soft light. I think overlay for now at least is going to kind of give us what we want. So you can see that the 4-color gradient affects what is actually there. Because of that color key, we took out some of the image there, so it won't affect that, which is great. Again, the layering of the effects in your effects panel is going to matter here. I want the dots to kind of like move around a little bit on their own and having its own bit of movement even when it's sitting still. So I'm literally just going to add an expression to all of these position keyframes here. So if we go to effects down here, see all the colors that we picked. Alt click the stopwatch for each of the points and do a wiggle expression. Do like 1 and 100. So it doesn't move a ton, like in terms of speed or anything, but the range of it, it's gonna kind of go pretty far, just so it's not too obvious that it's like wiggling in the same place. You kind of want it to be a broader range there. So I'll just kind of copy and paste this to the other points as well and just see how that can look. I think that's kind of interesting. It's kind of got like a colorama, like groovy, hypnotic effect to it, which is kind of nice. The next one we're going to do is a bit of curves. And here we're just going to kind of like bump the contrast a little bit, mess with the tones and the values a little bit. Subtle, but it makes a difference. So after curves, we're going to add turbulent displace. Obviously, this is not the effect we're trying to go for here. It's a little too warped. I'm actually going to increase the amount to about 60 or so, but I want the size to be all the way down to 2, so we kind of get this little bit of like rough edge kind of effect here. Another way that you can do this is add the roughen edges effect, which we used for the shading on the oranges and stuff. So if we try to move this down a bit, move our scale down, I'm going to bump up the complexity just a little bit as well. I want it to have just a subtle enough rough edge here. Next effect is going to be a glow. I'm going to bring the threshold up to like 75, radius about 120, the intensity about half. I'm also going to color pick straight from the color palette that we have here, just to kind of add another layer of color here in a different way. Now if we go back to our main comp, we can kind of see how it fits in with everything else, and I definitely think it's looking a lot better. I especially love that I can see the other parts of the design in the background behind the glass, which is great. I still don't think we're quite there yet in terms of the color and the contrast and everything, so I'm just going to make some other minor additions, maybe some levels and just some more contrast and dark bits here and there. So I ended up adding another color key pass here just to get a little extra transparency going. Adjusted the glow and turbulent displace and all the other effects we have kind of going on here. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to add a bit of fake liquid here in the glass so that when it moves, especially with the hand, it looks like there's actually something in there. And then we're going to try and add in some bubbles, and I may or may not keep with adding in the ice, but we can just add that in from Illustrator and Overlord if we really feel like doing that. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add kind of the base of liquid right here, and then I'll add the top separately. And I'm going to just do the pen tool real quick, just kind of go along this edge here as if it were actually inside the glass. So obviously the liquid's not going to be flat like this. And then we're going to add another shape layer, which is kind of the oval top. Kind of just try to match edges of the base liquid we kind of have going on here. And then from here, I'm going to pre-compose this. I'm going to pre-compose this so that we can add a displacement to it. So if we go in here, we're going to manipulate the top here. So doing a kind of a displacement sandwich, we're going to do an adjustment layer. And on that adjustment layer, we're going to do a displacement map effect. And then down below, we're going to create kind of a sphere, kind of like a makeshift wave in a way. We're going to have that sit at the bottom. And in the adjustment layer with the displacement effect, we're going to have it pick the wave shape, do effects and masks. And then I usually do luminance channel with displacement maps. So I'm going to reset the anchor point first. And then I'm just going to make a really basic position keyframe from left to right, because that's what's going to ultimately kind of affect that with the wave. And then I'll just go ahead and do 2 seconds and go all the way to the right. And I'm actually going to make this the color white. With displacement, it recognizes, especially on the luminance channel, it's going to recognize black and white values only. So I want to make sure it's white so that it catches all of that here. If I turn off the wave shape for a second, you can kind of see the outlines of the circle going here. And it looks really bad because our circle is a hard circle. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a Gaussian blur to it. It'll kind of recognize between black and white values. So it'll kind of have a blur there, and it'll kind of even out the shape a little bit. And I'm going to turn off repeat edge pixels so we get the full shape here. And now we can see it's a much more even wave, just so you can see it better. So that's pretty exaggerated, but it's a pretty smooth wave, which is what we want. I'm going to ease these keyframes here, kind of edit the speed graph just a little bit. So I think that's feeling pretty good. And then we're going to make this loop as well. So I'll select those keyframes, alt click the stopwatch on the position, loop out, cycle. You don't need it to ping pong back and forth. We just want it to repeat what it's doing here. So from here, I'm also going to make this displacement liquid the screen mode, so it kind of blends in a little bit better. I'm going to kind of fix this base liquid shape here because we don't want these corners to cut off. So I think overall that's looking pretty good. And something else I'm going to do too, I'm actually going to add a little bit of a Gaussian blur both of the liquid parts, just so there's not a harsh line going on, because everything is kind of pretty smooth. And be sure to turn off the repeat edge pixels. And so because of how we're layering everything in this main comp, base liquid and the top liquid, it's on top of the glass and hand, so it's going to be kind of like overlaying the hand here, which we don't want. So I'm going to take these 2 layers that we just did, I'll delete those, go into the glass hand composition, and then just paste them back in, so that it should be underneath the hand. So obviously I want to parent pieces of liquid to the glass. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add some little bubbles here at the bottom that kind of rise to the top pretty quickly. Add a shape layer, a very small ellipse there. Make sure that anchor point is down there. Call this bubble. And I think the main thing here is that I want to have the position of each individual bubble kind of randomly go up on its own, but overall I want it to go straight up. And I also want it to get smaller as well. Have the scale start where it's at, and up there I'm going to shrink it. But I want to have it wiggle as it's going up. So in the position property, I'm going to add a wiggle effect. Kind of see that start to wiggling a little bit more. Might be a little too sporadic. Try 6 and 15. So it has a little wider range. So now I just kind of want to copy and paste those same bubbles. Before I do that, I'll probably give it some effect. A little bit of a Gaussian blur as well. Probably lower the transparency on this as well. I'm going to go within this shape layer here with the 1 bubble go to contents, and I'm going to duplicate these a couple times. So I made a pre-comp called bubbles, and inside here I just duplicated those 2 layers with the bubbles just kind of going up and doing their thing. Alright, so now that I imported these makeshift ice cube pieces here from Illustrator, I'm going to kind of apply some of the same effects that I did to the oranges in the stem, just to give it a little bit of detail, and then I'll kind of give it some last effects so it kind of blends in with that glass a little bit better. So the last effect I want to add to this that I've kind of talked about all throughout was the posterize time. So we'll add that to our adjustment layer here, and currently our composition, our everything, is 24 frames, and let's just cut that in half just to see what that looks like. It's pretty subtle, but you can kind of notice that some of the frames are kind of a little bit choppier. It just feels more cell animated, and I feel like just kind of taking away the super smoothness of everything is kind of another layer of texture in itself. It's definitely a personal preference, but definitely play around with timing settings when it comes to your animations too, and not just color and speed graph and all that kind of stuff. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this video and this series was helpful. I know it was more drawn out than I wanted it to be personally. Nonetheless, I hope that any of the videos were helpful, and as always, any suggestions for future videos or series, greatly appreciated. So thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you next time.